Consider the following exercise. I will present a situation and ask you to reflect on how it makes you feel. What if you opened the news today and heard that 1,000 men were executed after being tortured for days? How does it make you feel? Take a few seconds. Now what if the story said 1,000 women were executed after being raped for days? How does that make you feel? And now 1,000 children were executed. How do you feel now? A good guess would be that each case didn't feel the same. Clearly, even the most humanistic person, as ideological as he or she may be, does not value human life or human suffering equally. And this is not a coincidence. It is something inherent in the human nature, and even if you can bring yourself to understand that every life is precious, and each and every human, man, woman, or child deserves our empathy equally, sounds somewhat weird, right? No matter how much time you'd spend trying to reach that point, some part inside you would still feel differently when empathizing with a man, a woman, or a child. So what happens in a case where someone or a group of individuals are in a bad place and need help from others? Do you think they'll get the same amount of attention, the same amount of empathy, or the same amount of help? The obvious truth is that human beings as a whole place a minimal amount of care to what happens to men, if any. I imagine that as I'm speaking now, some of you, maybe even many of you, are not really moved by my words. Maybe I sound a bit boring and tedious and it feels like I'm just bitching. If that's the case, then excellent! This is exactly what I need you to feel right now. The lack of interest you experience at this moment is the best way to demonstrate my point. You don't really care. Repeat it in your head. I don't really care about issues men face. I read a proverb once that said, when the weak are in a bad place, everyone expects the strong to help them. But when the strong are in a bad place, everyone expects them to help themselves. I don't really care about issues men face, because I perceive men in general as the strongest in society. And so when men need help, you have very little inclination to help them. Some of you may even feel contempt for them when they ask you to help them. Can you understand that when a man is in a bad place, it doesn't really matter if he's physically strong, or on average his gender is the strongest? It doesn't really matter for him that there are more male CEOs or members of parliament. Can you understand that? If you can you feel that? Can you feel for him? Will you be motivated to help him with the same drive you'd be motivated to help a woman? Or are you more inclined to think that he should try to manage on his own? Because women and children are weak or weakened. They require society, mainly men, to step up and help them. Men are not weak, even when they are. Men do not require our help, even when they do. And we should not focus on men because some people simply have more worth. Now, if you ever told yourself the lie that we need to focus on a specific group, for example women, because the majority of people who need help are women, then you really managed to fool yourself. It is not about numbers. It never was. It was always about who you perceive as weak and who you empathize with the most. So let me break it down for you. A man's life is as valuable as a woman's life or a child's life. Take some time to digest that notion. A man's life is as valuable as a woman's life or a child's life. I wonder how many of you have a very hard time to agree with me, and if you don't, excellent. Now you finally understand why you're not a humanist, an egalitarian, or a feminist. What you do is just fooling yourselves, and as much as people would like to reach the point where they will treat everyone equally, there will still be this dissonance, this conflict, this dilemma in them that would cripple most of them to one extent or another. If you're thinking now, but there are cases which are objectively different. For example, children objectively need help from others because they are objectively weaker than grown-ups. Well, that doesn't contradict anything I said. But tell me, what is the difference between a helpless child in need and a helpless grown-up in need? And more interesting, what is the difference between a helpless woman in need and a helpless man in need? That's a much more difficult question. For many of you, somewhere inside there's a voice saying, well, the difference between a helpless woman in need, a helpless man in need, and a helpless child in need is probably the man would be more capable to help himself. Right? As if the term helpless doesn't mean anything. There's a car accident and now 3 people need our immediate medical attention. A man, a woman, and a child. Who would you treat first? Who would you treat last? Why are some lives more valuable than others? If you're one of the people who think we should overcome our inherent quote-unquote flaws and biases, and think everyone should be equal, shouldn't we give the same attention to men's issues as we give to women's issues? Regardless if you think we live in a patriarchy, objectively men have serious issues that almost no one outside men's rights activists deal with. Unlike women, a group the West has vast amounts of inherent empathy for, men do not have a well-funded, unique field in academia that has spent the last 40 years studying, measuring, quantifying the issues men face, and creating entire theories around it. Men do not have a billion-dollar industry that takes care of them when they are suffering from domestic violence, even when 1 in 7 men is a victim. Because as mentioned, they are not real victims if they are capable of taking care of themselves. Even when they're not. Men don't get the attention, the funds, the services, the activism, the institutions, the media's ear and mouth, or the empathy they deserve same as everyone else when they suffer. When they are oppressed by the system. It is funny. You'd think that in a patriarchy or an androcentric society that is focused or centered on men, organizations like the MRM would have all the funds, all the support, and an academic field specifically targeted to men's issues, way before women got all that. You'd have a vast majority of domestic violence shelters for men only. Men would be able to decide if a woman should abort a child or not, or at least unilaterally decide not to pay child support. They would be able to apply for automatic custody and demand the woman to pay child support. If we are living in a male-centered patriarchy, because there are more men in positions of power, then it's the most pathetic male-centered patriarchy one can imagine. It is pretty obvious once you put a flashlight on it that this is anything but the case. We don't really care about other men, even when they occupy most positions of power. We have no empathy for them. And it is not because of the patriarchy, and it is not even because of the feminist movement. It is just human nature.